YouTube, hello again for the first time in quite a while, quite a long while actually. Was it before auto assembly or after? Briefly after auto assembly, I believe. Since I made my last video, I've been busy. What can I say? I've had a lot of mails and comments, someone asking where I am and why I'm not making YouTube videos at the moment. Quick answer: time, energy, and inclination, a terminal lack thereof. That's the reason why I haven't been making YouTube videos of late on any subject. I've been too busy, and the energies that I usually pour into YouTube have gone elsewhere, and everything that YouTube provides me, I've been getting elsewhere. That's the long and short of it. I think that this whole thing, YouTube as something to engage with, as something that individuals do, is at its best when it's an entirely selfish exercise. I think it becomes facile. It becomes empty and hollow and lacking in meaning when it's done to simply meet expectation or because one has some other agenda, i.e. if one it makes a living off of it, like certain parties within certain communities do on YouTube, certain ideologically charged parties. I have no truck with that. The only reason I make YouTube videos is because they do something for me, and that's it. That's the long and short of it. I don't feel obliged to make them. I don't make them to please other people. I make them because I like doing them, because I have the inclination to do so. And when I don't have the time or the energy or the inclination to do so, they don't happen. And that's the long and short of that. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about here. What I really want to talk about is probably one of my favourite subjects ever. It's certainly the one that obsesses me the most. Certainly the most consistently. It's one that's always there in the back of my mind, and that is narrative and fiction and writing, the act of writing and whatnot. I am primarily a writer and indeed an author now. You can find my fiction at Dark Moon Digest, in the magazine Dark Moon Digest, and also in some of the publications as well, in some of the books. In fact, very soon, next year no less, you may be finding something more consistent turning up, something a bit more fulsome turning up with my name on it. More on that as and when. But fiction it's the primary obsession in my existence. But Clive Barker, arguably my favourite author. Hang on, I've got a knot in my hair. That's very annoying. But Clive Barker once said that there are lives lived for love and there are lives lived for art. And I account myself amongst the latter. Definitely. Not that the two are mutually exclusive, they can intersect, but I do think that a lot of what love and relationships provide in terms of fulfillment and self-transgression and transcendence and all of that wonderful stuff, art also provides. Creative expression also provides it. In fact, I'd argue that creative expression is better at it. Because the thing about love that very few people tell you is, and that very little of the fiction relating to love, the experience of it, expresses, is that it is temporary. It's one of those truths, those fundamental truths that people don't like hearing. They really don't, particularly people who are just sort of in the early stages of falling in love. It goes away. It changes. The aspect of love changes into something else. It matures, or it softens. It becomes something either more enduring, or it just dissolves. And that's the nature of the thing. It's the nature of the experience. I mean, I don't understand these people who say I believe in or I don't believe in love. It's one of those things that happens. It's a subjective human experience that occurs. It's like saying I believe in sight or I believe in the fact that I feel hungry. It's ridiculous to apply notions of belief to it. It is a phenomena that human beings experience, whether you believe in it or not. Um, Whether you happen to experience it or not is another matter. It just may be one of those things that you won't experience because you won't meet the right person, or maybe you are chemically incapable of feeling it. There are people who are chemically incapable of falling in love, certainly. I have no doubt of that. Sociopaths, for example, have real problems. And not just sociopaths, there are people who simply don't fall in love. For whatever reason, their relationships to other people are not as they're not as fraught as that. They're not as on the moment of the moment as that, which is fine. That's probably a good thing. The problem with love is that it is not a lie in and of itself. A wise man once told me it is not a lie in and of itself, but it is a liar. It's a liar in the sense that it distorts things. It makes things seem more enduring, better than they are. It also makes things seem a hell of a lot worse and more fragile than they actually are, and then ends up eroding itself, which is a very weird thing. It's a very strange state to be in. Not one I've been in for a long time, I must admit, a hell of a long time. And I'm not sure I mourn it that much. I must admit, I'm not sure I mourn it that much at all. It takes so much energy. It takes so much energy being in love. It takes so much out of you because you are engaged with this other human being, or indeed these other human beings, depending on how your particular manifestation of love occurs. It drains you. It's a parasitic experience, or in the most ideal sense, it's symbiotic, but often it's parasitic in that the parties involved leech from one another emotionally in terms of attention and focus, and but these energies that usually could be relegated to something else. And you give it quite happily. You're very happy to be cannibalized when you're in love. That's the weird thing about it. There is a certain masochism to the experience. There's an innate masochism. You are quite happy to be flayed open and rifled around inside of and have bits taken away from you. You give them. You happily open yourself and give bits of yourself to that person. You take bits as well. I mean, ideally, you take bits as well. This is another thing that I like about the experience. It is a really interesting, formative experience because you take bits of the people that you fall in love with, the relationships that you have. You take bits of them. And incorporate them into yourself. You grow as a result of the experience, ideally. You actually become more than you were. You transgress beyond the boundaries of your parameters of self, which is always a good thing. That's always a good thing. And that's what art does. That's what the creative experience does, for me anyway. Speaking subjectively, my experience of it is that it allows you to step outside parameters of self, because you are when you're writing a character or something or a story, you put yourself into a position that you haven't necessarily lived. You experience it in the abstract, in terms you project what it means to this human being, to a human being who may in fact, or not necessarily a human being, could be anything, couldn't it? A vampire, or a furry avatar, or whatever the hell you write about. You are placing yourself in that position temporarily. You are looking through their eyes. They're very real. For that moment, for that period that you're writing, they're very real. They're very intense. And what's really interesting when you're in the zone, when you are channeling whatever it is you're channeling, sometimes they surprise you. The characters you write can start acting in ways that you didn't intend or that you haven't projected consciously. They actually start doing things of their own accord. They will act contrary to the intention of the story, for example, and that's very cool. That's very cool. I think that's when stories flow very beautifully. The best stories, the best narratives are the ones that don't come from plot. I don't like plot very much. That's a weird thing to say for a writer, but I don't like plot very much. I'm not the biggest fan of plotted fiction. It can be done really, really well. Ian McEwan does plotted fiction, by which I mean that he sits down before he writes stories. He has the concept, and then he plots out exactly where the story is going to go, chapter for chapter, and that can work. That can work very well. Ian McEwan does it particularly well, funnily enough. But by and large, I think that's a cop-out. I don't think it works very well, generally speaking. It has this tendency to make stories feel synthetic and stretched and forced, because the characters and the events are all sort of hammered into this this framework, this template. And very often they want to do something else. They want to be something else. There is something more natural, more organic happening over there outside the boundaries of the template that you've prescribed for them that they want to do, and that ideally they would be more dynamic and more interesting in. So for me, the best fiction is character driven. It's character and ideas driven. It's not plotted. It's certainly not plot driven. There can be very good plot. There can be very good plot, but not often, in my experience. I like the more natural fiction, which is it starts with a situation usually, or a concept, or a sentence, and then it evolves from that as the characters start to do things within the parameters that you set for them, or often outside of them. It's a very strange thing. It's a very strange experience. And very cool. There's nothing quite like it, that alpha state that occurs when you sit down. I mean, I'm sure it's true for anybody who creates anything. Artists, writers, poets, whatever, musicians, composers, and so on and so forth. There is a particular state that you train your mind to get into, and the only way to do it is to do it. I mean, that's something that a lot of people who enter into the craft or the art, or whatever you want to call it, initially don't want to hear. They want an easy fix. They want, they'll go to book signings and they'll ask, how do you do this? Well, you just do it. I mean, it sounds like a cop-out answer, but that's the case. If you want to write, you sit down with pen and paper or at your keyboard and you start typing or writing words, and stuff happens. It won't flow very easily when you first start to do it, because you haven't trained your mind to get into the state where it will flow easily. But as time goes on, and when I mean time, I mean a lot of time, you'll get better at it. It's one of those things. It takes time, it takes practice, and more importantly, it takes sacrifice. It takes sacrifice because you need to put essential energies into it. You can't do everything, and that's another thing that many of the people I know who sort of claim to want to write or want to do this or want to do that don't want to hear. They want an easy way. They want to be J.K. Rowling, or they want to be Stephen King, but they don't want to do the work or put in the sacrifice that's necessary. The raw fact of the matter is this: you need to write a lot if you want to be good. You need to write a lot, and I mean every day. Every day you need to write something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lot, but it has to be there. And you need to do it consistently, and you need to do it for a long time, and you need to have the wherewithal to say, I'm sorry, I can't go out at the moment because I've got to get these pages finished. I'm sorry, I can't go and do this at the moment because I've got to get these pages finished. If you don't want to do that, if it's too much of a sacrifice, then maybe it isn't for you. The raw fact of the matter is, if it's really what you want to do, then it's not a sacrifice. It's what you want to do. There's no compromise there. The other stuff is the compromise, and you should know. And ultimately, it should always come first. That's another thing. That's why so many writers, artists, creative people have such issues with things like relationships and whatnot. It's one of the many reasons. It's because our energies are devoted elsewhere, and something else will always come first. That's the raw fact of the matter. I, for example, am an isolated individual by nature. I like human company quite a lot, but I can do without it. I don't need it. In fact, I spend the vast majority of my time alone, doodling, writing, thinking about things, because that's my nature. Um, I need that alone time, and that again, going back to the notion of relationships and love and whatnot. As and when I have relationships, which are rare, um, the other person needs to put up with that. I mean, that's a terrible thing in many respects. It's a terrible little thing. It's very selfish, incredibly egocentric, but that's the way of it. That's the way of it. There will be periods where I will go away to a room somewhere and I'll be gone for hours, and I need to be left alone. Simple as. That's the way of it. Do not disturb goes on the door, and that's it. Leave me alone. I'm busy. I'm writing, and woe betide anyone who interrupts me while I'm writing. Oh God. Unless they come with tea. If they've got tea, hot, sweet with milk, then fine. Fine. They can leave the tea and leave. Go. They don't even have to talk. Just go. Just go. That would be wonderful. Because that's the way it is. When you're in the state and someone disturbs you, you could kill them. There is a black moment where just rage, black lightning strike of rage, where you could quite easily do someone some damage, because it breaks it. It breaks the rhythm. It interrupts the flow of what's happening, and it's very difficult to pick it up, especially if you haven't been writing for a long time. In fact, it can derail you for the day. That can. So if you happen to live with someone or whatever, one of the things you need to impress upon them is that for this period you need to be left alone. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. That's the raw fact of the matter. It's an interesting thing. When I did briefly when I went to university, I did a joint course of English and creative writing, but I very quickly switched it to entirely English. The reason being that creative writing classes are a waste of time. For me, anyway. I didn't like them at all. They didn't work for me. What I found was that there were lots of people there who claimed they wanted to write. In fact, what a lot of them claimed is they wanted to be writers. And there's a difference. There's a difference between wanting to be a writer and wanting to write. The ones who want to write are the ones who will be writers. They're the ones who already are writers. They're the ones who want to create something. The ones who want to be writers are the ones who want the lifestyle. They're the ones who want to be regarded as writers, rather than actually just writing, in which instance you will automatically be a writer. Oh, and by the way, being a writer, in the same as any other craft, being a writer has nothing to do with being published. It has nothing to do with being successful in a popular or financial sense. Have a look at half the shit that's on the stalls, on the shelves of libraries, supermarkets, Waterstones, bookstores these days. The stuff that sells well, that is just phenomenally financially successful and is read by millions, the vast majority of it is awful. In terms of craft work, in terms of the inspiration, the ideas, the rhythm, the tone, the technicalities of its creation, it's shit. 50 Shades of Grey. It's awful. It's so badly written. It has no technical acumen at all. It's awful. The rhythm is appalling. The ideas are shit. The characters are awful. There's no narrative at all. There's just situations, and they're not even particularly interesting situations. The same is true of it's not true of all published work. Of course, it's not. But it's true of a lot of it. Just because something is published and widely read and makes a lot of money doesn't make it good at all. Same is true of any media. The twats from the X Factor and Pop Idol and whatnot, the people who have no talent at all, but who are a manufactured phenomenon, who just look right and can be marketed, You know, they've got no singing talent, they can't read music, they can't play instruments, they haven't worked at it. They don't love music. What they love is the idea of what the lifestyle provides. They don't love music. If they loved music, like they consistently proclaim, then they'd have done it like the real musicians and singers and songwriters do. They'd have learnt to read music, they'd have learnt to play an instrument, they'd have joined a band, they'd have worked their way up, they'd have honed their craft. But they don't. They're just people who want the easy fix, which is what the X Factor provides. They want the lifestyle, and that's it. And I have no time for it. There's a lot of people like that in all of the arts. So many people who A, assume that it's easy, B, they think that talent's cheap. That's a nasty thing to have to say, but it's true. Talent is cheap. There are hundreds of people who are naturally talented in one arena or another. They have a certain natural inclination, but unless they have the drive and the dedication, that talent is going to remain raw and unrefined. It's still going to produce shit, because everybody produces shit when they first start out, regardless of how talented you are. You haven't honed the craft. You haven't put in the dedication. And also, talent doesn't mean anything. There are millions and millions of talented writers, artists, singers, songwriters, directors out there who don't get the break. They are not in the right place at the right time. And a lot of it is that. It's that. I mean, that's no reason not to do it. If you love it, if you want to do it, you'll do it anyway. But if you have any ambition of getting your work out there and trying to promulgate it, then it's right place, right time. A lot of it. I mean, the more you do and the more you practice, the better it will be. The more chance you have of getting good stuff in front of somebody who can make it happen. So that's reason enough to do it consistently. But that's not a good enough motivation in and of itself. The only reason to produce this stuff, the only reason I write, is for me. It's selfish. It's entirely egocentric. It's entirely selfish. It's because I have to do it. In the same way, the only reason I produce these things, these videos here, is it's selfishness. It's entirely egocentric. This is doing something for me. It's allowing me to explore these ideas, to express, to communicate, to vent, to hash something out psychologically. Just as the short story I began earlier today, I do 10 pages a day minimum, if I can. I mean, that's the bare minimum every day. If I'm not at work, then I'll do a lot more than that. The only reason I did it is because I have to do it. It's something I've been doing for so long now, and has become so ingrained and is so bound up with my sense of self-definition that it has to be done. It gets the shit out. All of the psychological weirdness that's in my mind. And believe me, when you read my fiction, I think a lot of you are going to be a little bit surprised. Even given your presumptions on me or the way I market myself on this channel, a lot of it is very fucked up. It's very weird. It's very surreal. There's a lot of dredging the depths of the subconscious and drawing it up and throwing it in your face, that sort of thing. I like that a lot. I like the darkness. I like the complexity, the ambiguity, the true raw, bloody, black depths of the human soul and psyche. That's what I like to rake through. That essential shit, that firmament, is what I like a lot. That's where I dwell a lot of the time, and that's what's in my fiction. I really don't like half-assed fiction. That's another thing I hate. If it's compromised, I hate that. If there's a sense that it's been compromised to appeal to a mass market, or because the author or the writer rather has assumed that it may be too much for the reader to handle, fuck off. As a reader, I determine what's too much, not you. So I assume that my readers are at least as intelligent as I am, often much more so. I assume that they're not going to be narrow-minded dicks who are going to be offended at the least thing. I assume that they're going to be clever enough to take offence for what it is, to realise that if they are offended, that's good. If your sensibilities are shuddered or shifted or shaken, that's good. That's not a bad thing at all. I don't like writers who talk down to their readers. I really don't. In fact, I have nothing but contempt for them. The writers and the artists who assume that their audience is not as smart as they are and therefore needs to be talked down to, needs to be given simplified versions of ideas that they can digest, that they can handle. No. Give them everything. Give them it in all of its ambiguity, its complexity, its horror, its eroticism, its every aspect. Just give them it. Gratis. Just give them it. And let them make of it what they will. That's something I like. I really appreciate fiction that does that. And that doesn't spoon feed me conclusions, but which gives me the subject and the situation and then allows me to determine what the significance is. I like that a lot. There's a degree of engagement that occurs there, which you don't get with fiction that is more standard, which is just this happens, therefore this happens, and this is the significance of that. I don't like that at all. I'm not interested in being told the significance of it. That either A, it should be evident from the events, or B, it should be something that you derive yourself, that you determine for yourself as the individual reader. So yeah, this is, I don't even know why I started this video now. I can't even remember where I was going with it, actually. I was talking about fiction, wasn't I? Yes, well, I had something to drink, excuse me, and I've been busy all day, so I'm not 100% coherent. But yes, fiction, it's the thing. It's the thing that obsesses me more than anything else in the world. Narrative stories, oral traditions, written traditions, mythologies, that sort of thing. If there was one particular label that I don't mind adhering to, I'd say it was probably a narrativist or a mythologist. Myth and storytelling and metaphor, I think, it represents our function in the abstract, that status that we occupy as human beings, which makes us more than the animals we eat and rely upon. It's one of the few things that does. The fact that we have a neocortex that allows us to function in the abstract and that allows us to develop these anatomies that are metaphorical. They're not real as such, but in many ways they're much more real than this stuff, this flesh and blood, physical, quantifiable anatomy that you're seeing here now. In the sense that this is just mechanics. This is just what supports the abstract. The abstract is what matters. The personality, the contrivance of personality, the construct, the accrual and the imposition of the abstract self is what matters. And for me, what literature and fiction does is it allows it to build, it allows it to develop, rather than leaving it to stagnate. It allows it to change and to shift and to transform and become more than it is. There's no end product to that, by the way, to that process. There's no end. From the first thought that sparks in your mind to the very last that flickers out when you die, assuming it does, for the moment, there's no end product. There is just the flux of metaphor and abstraction and memory and experience that is personality, that is consciousness. There's no end. There's no final product. There's no absolute or supreme state of human consciousness. There is just its own development. And to throw that away, to ignore it out of some sense of comfort, or familiarity, or fear, is to ignore what it is to be human. It's pathetic. Which is why I have such problems with prescribed ideologies and prescribed um, institutions or templates of what humanity should be, and all this nonsense.